Hey devs, you're tuning into the Debug log number 113, and it's a really good episode. We actually had the privilege of partnering with Unity Technologies for their Digital Developer Day series, Indie Edition, and we're talking to you about pitching your brand. That's basically how do you talk to the investors, how do you prepare for a pitch, and everything that goes around about building a personal brand or a business brand or a project brand. So we talk about all that and more. It's a great conversation. Andrew, myself, and Ryan, we dive a little deep with some anecdotes about some of the kind of experiences that we've had pitching our brand. So sit back and relax and tune in to the Debug log number 113. So hello and welcome to the Debug log. My name is Obinna.
I'm Andrew Curry.
I'm Ryan Kilgore.
And yes, today we're coming to you live from Unity's Digital Developer Day Indie Edition. Today we're talking to you about pitching your brand. So that's a little bit about pitching, a little bit about branding. So we're going to get into all of that and more. But actually, just to start and set the stage, kind of like a base level conversation, is understanding what this means when I say pitching your brand. So I'm going to throw that over to Andrew first and say, hey, what does it mean when I say pitching your brand?
I mean, we talked about this before. It can be a lot of things. I think as creators and stuff going into this, your brand can be a bigger a thing than just creating some sort of product. This is sort of personal. A lot of times you're making games, it can be really personal. And so when we talk about pitching your brand, it's sort of, we'll get into all the different types of audiences for that, but it's really kind of telling about the project you're working on, but also more about yourself and about like a sense of what you're all about, because that's sort of one of the most important things. We'll get into it, but that's one of the most important things as you start telling people about yourself, is really giving them a flavor of like who you are. So.
Gotcha. Excellent. Yes, it's starting to make some sense to me. What about you, Ryan? What's pitching your brand to you? What's that mean? What's that phrasing mean to you?
Well, it's very similar to what Andrew said, right? You know, it's selling yourself, you know, and, you know, because you're going to have a project or something you've worked on, you may want to pitch to somebody, and, you know, it's something you've created, and, but you're not only like selling them that, you're selling them like you said, who you are, like what's your culture, what's your work ethic, you know, what are kind of your visions and ideals for the thing you've created. And in the pitch part, you want to do that in the most succinct way possible. That way they can kind of get a feel for that and see if they want to be on board with, you know, who you are and what you know, what you're presenting to them.
Gotcha. Cool. Yeah. So you guys both kind of talked about like, it's really a reflection of who you are, or maybe even your product or your organization or your studio. So I think that's actually a loaded kind of comment. It's like, hey, it's about who you are. But like that's, I think something that's hard to unpack for a lot of people. For me, especially for my studio.
What do you think, Obinna? You don't get to slide away from the answer.
Wait. I can't just like cheat off your homework and just say it's about me.
Yeah, you can if you like.
No, it's pretty much the same. Yeah, I kind of want to agree 100%. It's literally about who you are, or your organization or your product, understanding what value you bring. And I think a lot of kind of quote you'll hear or phrasing around pitching is about a value proposition. And that's kind of what it is kind of selling yourself, selling your product, understanding those first before you can even sell anything is very key. So I definitely want to, plus one to what both of you guys said. It's literally about understanding yourself. So to that point, like, how do you go about like understanding your brand, discovering your brand, and understanding where you're coming from, so you can like pitch?
Yeah, that's the question. Ryan, you go ahead.
Well, I always lean back to personal experience, because I mean, that just seems to be the best teacher, right? So, and I mean, we look back at kind of what we've done over the past 5 or 6 years, and it's a lot of the time it can be trial and error. Where you think you want to go is not necessarily where you should be, right? You know, because personally, we started off doing, not only the podcast, but we had a lot of peripheral stuff there where we were saying, hey, we're gonna teach all these lessons and have all these videos for how-tos for game development. And we did that for a little while, but we found we're very busy people and we couldn't keep up that cadence with the podcast and all of that. And so kind of came down to some self-reflection over the years of like, well, what can we do? What do we really enjoy? And let's boil it down to that essence. And then that is when things started to become, a little easier, a little cleaner, right? We started getting out episodes a little faster, not fast, but a little faster.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's like, figuring out who you are, I think, is the first step in that, and like embracing that. And I think that'll just make your life easier over time. So,
Right. I think it might be goes without saying, but I think branding is something that is spreads across different industries, different products. So we're talking, like Ryan was just mentioning, we're talking about the podcast in and of itself, and the kind of the branding and the maturation that we had through that, which can be applied to games. It can be applied to your business, any entrepreneurial endeavor. So I think it's like this part in this phase of discovery or branding discovery, and before you get to the pitch, is going to be key to wherever you are, whether you're making an indie game or you're building out some, I don't know, research project. So it's all very necessary, whatever you do. Andrew, are you going to speak to that as well, and kind of?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what I mean. It's sort of, I mean, it gets onto that point of authenticity, but like what Ryan was saying, it's like, to be even more specific about it, it's like we started this project to say like, hey, we're game developers and we enjoy talking shop after work.
Right.
And we do that, and it's fun to do that, and that's what we do well. And then we go, let's do some other stuff. Let's write books, and but none of us got into that for the reason. And I say that because for that same reason. I say that because it applies to game developers too, especially. I mean, this gets a little more meta into a bigger conversation before why you're doing what you're doing, but it translates into the pitch, because if you're not kind of authentic when you get to that pitch, then it's going to be you have an uphill battle ahead of you. But like, it ties into the authenticity of like what types of game you want to make. You're not making the same games just because you want to do,
right,
because of market potential. So I mean, that's part of it, but a lot of times you're making what you're passionate about.
Right.
That's where that art and commerce we'll talk about comes in. But that authenticity is the big thing. It's like you got to really, a lot of this is downhill after that if you can really pull off the authenticity of why you're passionate about the project, and
right,
where you're coming from, the context of where you're coming from.
For sure. And I think one thing that you always say, Andrew, is like almost like the unique selling point is that kind of that intersection where you're like, that's where you find out what your sweet sauce is, and how you can make that pitch.
Right.
Cool. So yeah. So actually, let's transition. I actually put a timer. We're like notoriously bad. If you listen to the show, we're notoriously bad for sticking to timing. And I feel like we haven't recorded an episode shorter than an hour in probably a year. So this is going to be a feat for us as we work through this. So yeah, let's move on to the pitch side of things and kind of understanding the foundations and what lays the groundwork for the pitch. One thing you said already is authenticity. The second piece is, or I think the other piece that you mentioned was like, it's a creative endeavor. It's something that's, a very creative process. I guess from a high level, if we're just talking about the pitch, like who would you say is like involved in the pitch? Is it literally just like, let's say the CEO or the initial game designer, or is, who's involved in that kind of conversation between whether you're talking to investors? I guess we haven't really talked about audience, but whether you're talking to investors or you're talking to your friends and family or talking to coworkers, who is involved in that pitch process? Or who needs to be involved in that pitch process?
I mean, you can't skip that audience part there for that. That really, the number one, well, I mean, I was thinking the number one thing when of anything, we always talk about this. We have a lot of past episodes about like scope and other things. What you do in like game design documents and stuff. Like this is almost applicable to any problem. Once you go into it, it's like, what problem are we solving? What's the goal? And what's the audience? And not even just that, I would say especially with like kind of, people do this with movies, but with games, and also the pitch, you're describing this creative thing. So it's like, how do you want the people to feel when they're walking out of that pitch? What's the experience you want them to have? Do you want them to get excited? Are they going to be excited about the technical parts? Is it a technical audience? Or do you want them to feel like, oh, this is going to be a cool, scary game or whatever it is? So I think the first part of it, before you can answer like who's involved with it on your team, is really answering that question of what's the goal? Is it to get money? Is it to get partners? Is it to get supporters and fans? It could be pitching, a lot of times in this context, we're talking about some sort of official support, whether it's partnerships or money. So we'll leave it at that for just not get crazy with it. But even that, going into it, you got to go with what is the goal of it?
Right.
Are we trying to like technically show off here? Are we trying to, dazzle them with our awesome storytelling or, our cool idea.
Right.
Right.
It's kind of like your resume, right? You're just not
Right.
going to blanket the same resume to every company for
Right.
every job. It's like, you want to tailor that to what, what they're looking for, what what interests them,
Right.
or else it's just something generic and they're like, oh, all right, well, I don't care.
Right. Okay. Well, let me add some framing to this so that we can kind of have a maybe more direct and succinct conversation about the pitch. Let's start from the beginning, because this is how it happened for me. Is like the first time I'm pitching my game is to a person, or to not even to a person, but like to my sibling or to my family member,
Right.
or to a friend. Let's say that those are our guardrails for this pitch. Like what's the context? How do I kind of approach that conversation? And does that differ from when I pitch to an investor or VC?
Yeah. It just depends. Again, it's like what you're doing. If you're doing it for if you're doing for practice for those VCs, then it's the same pitch. That is what you're doing it for. But I do think pitching it to them is the practice for getting into it and getting part of that, process. Like, I don't know, like what you're gonna, again, it's like you have to approach the things not like is a way to get confidence. It's not like you're trying to get something from the people, but you're trying to work with these people or do something. So it's not like a part of this thing is that, and you're also talking about you're bringing value to the people you're pitching. So it doesn't look like I know it can feel weird because it feels like you get to this weird power dynamic, like you're asking for help, but they want to work on projects. They want to do these things. And so whether you're doing it to your sister or brother in the room or to the VC, I would really practice that part about what we're talking about. That's where that brand needs to actually come out and actually not be afraid to not just go through these notes and next thing I have is to really express your passion and let that stuff actually come out, because that's the thing that's going to change anybody's mind. That's the one factor of outside of context of any of these pitches that's going to inspire your brother or it's going to inspire those people sitting in the boardroom, because everybody wants it to be good. Nobody's in this conversation with you. They want you to bore them,
That's fair.
Yeah, no, I definitely think there's definitely overlaps between those pitches. But again, I think you also have to know who you're, like we've been saying, know who you're targeting, because, you're not going to go over the finances with your sister, necessarily, but, it's like, oh, and here's my, capital over the next few years. They're like, oh, I just wanted to hear about the game. But it is good to practice with somebody sort of, and actually get the flow for it, get the connection, figure out what people are wanting to hear. And then you retarget that when it comes to the official time and say, like, okay, but it's not my sister anymore. Obviously it's a VC or a publisher or somebody like that. So.
Right. Actually, to go off that a little bit more, one thing I would want to say to kind of emphasize, well, we kind of said it's like the official thing is the VC and the investor. And I would kind of argue and say, hey, the official thing is whoever you're talking to.
Right.
It could be to your sister, it could be to your cousin, could be to your coworker. So you approach every single pitch as if it is the official thing. And it's just a different audience, because you're going to have to pitch to not only VCs, not only to other studios and publishers, but you're going to be pitching to a whole, gamut of people. Whoever your niche target audience is for your game, you're going to be pitching to them through marketing. So you have to really instill and kind of learn how to expose your brand or pitch your project to whoever and do that officially. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to add on that because I think we mentioned this earlier. We talked about this previously. It's like the thing about pitching is we're always thinking like it's at the beginning of the project. We haven't even started yet. Maybe we want some money, want some interest. You don't ever stop doing this pitch.
Right.
Because up to the point of marketing is a pitch for a game. When you're a reporter, when you're talking to journalists at any of these outlets or the website or video reviews, they're asking what your game's about, what'd you do, you have to pitch the game. We've been to, and also that's a great point about always make sure you're delivering that authenticity and passion to whoever. Because we've been back in before the pandemic times and several unites before. And it's like you talk to anybody, you just talk to people casually, but you don't know who people are. You don't know who people are and meet like in the elevator. That's literally why they call it elevator pitches, or like why, just walking around. But just, making sure that it's, you're transferring that passion and authenticity wherever you go, because you're never going to also, get used to it. You're never going to stop pitching this until it's like done. It's in the archives and you're working on the next game.
And I imagine folks that are on the call that have done this pitch, even if it's to a friend, and they get that feeling like when they finish the pitch and you're like, and your friend's like, what is the game about? Or like, what are you doing? Or,
Oh.
and it's that feeling where you're like, maybe I didn't, nail that pitch, even though, it's someone casual, someone that you think is like, it doesn't really have to be so formal. But I think it's very, very key and very pivotal to kind of nail that pitch every time, because what it does, it's not even for them. Sometimes it's really for you to really master how you're selling that product, because beyond your sibling or whoever you're pitching to, your friend and coworker, when you start doing pitches to VCs and people that maybe you're asking for partnerships from, that level of confidence and knowing your game and knowing what you're working on is going to be very critical to actually, instilling that success and that passion that you have for your game. So that's what go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I didn't interrupt. I want to add one thing because I don't know this. You're mentioning pitching to your brother's sister room made me think of a bunch of ideas. And it's one is a piece of advice is that ability, because what we're talking about here is to how to articulate your vision or whatever to other people,
right,
when they can't see it, and it can be frustrating. You're like, I don't they understand what I'm talking about, because it's like, well, they didn't have the idea, you did, so that's why they didn't have the idea. They would need you to pitch it to them. But from talking from experience, that's a muscle that can be trained. Like learning how to articulate not just ideas, plans, passion, like the whole vision of a project. It can be frustrating at first because you can kind of get excited and your ideas are like a mile down ahead of you. And you can pitch it, like you said, that made me think of that. You can pitch it to people and like, what? And then sometimes your friends might not be the best people to pitch it to, but don't be discouraged by that. Like just work on explaining your ideas to people constantly. Because I've had to do that in professional, like as product manager for a lot of serious game stuff I work on every day. And that stuff gets better. Like your muscle of that gets really good at, you start to get a sixth sense of understanding where people aren't following you. You get really good at reading a room, even over a Zoom call. And just don't get discouraged by what your friends say. That's what I'm saying. Just understand that that's a thing that gets better, and you can get better at that. That's like a skill you can develop.
Right. Cool. Man, you just brought up a conversation that it could take a long time to actually dive into it. So I'm going to bring it up anyway. So you said like even with Zoom calls, just like the nature and the landscape of pitches has shifted a little bit. You'll talk to VCs, you'll talk to investors nowadays and publishers, and they're like, hey, I'm in Zoom calls all day. And before I would go to their studio, or they would come to our office, and then we would sit down, have lunch, and then do the pitch.
Right.
I think that whole dynamic has shifted, and kind of mastering this new way of pitching. I wouldn't say it's a new way of pitching, but like just the alternatives to pitching and how you deliver your pitch is kind of changing in this post-COVID world where people are more remote more often and doing this virtually. So I think that leads into the conversation maybe more to like the tools of the trade, what it takes to pitch, or maybe what tools you have used in the past or in the present to pitch and kind of have those conversations about an idea and deliver those successfully. Do you guys want to talk about some of those things?
What do you mean? Just like gameplay teasers and things like that, or?
Yeah. I think that's one mode, and I think. Okay, if we circle back or come back down to the indie studio, I think that's another thing to talk about is just like the resources available. Like gameplay trailers may not be something that you can afford as far as timing goes, or maybe just resources or even talent. I think there's potential solutions to maybe all three of those. Like, hey, you could find something online, someone online to do that, help it out, outsource it. But maybe just like, I'll just speak personally first. Personally, one thing that I've used is, of course there's in-person pitches, but then there's also like PowerPoints creating PowerPoint slides and decks or game decks based on who you're pitching to has been really effective for me. But I've also seen sides where people, they don't want a PDF sent to their email, or they don't want a Dropbox link, and they want to access it some other way, some maybe more efficient way. So one thing I would recommend is kind of have multiple ways you deliver your pitch. Same content sometimes, but just different kind of mediums. One is a PowerPoint. Two is like having maybe a website with the deck on there. And you can do that with PowerPoints or Google Slides or something like that. So you can kind of mix those two worlds, but making it maybe more accessible to different, audiences is kind of key.
Yeah, you don't want any barriers up there for communication. It's like the quickest way they can get their eyes on it, then they can start interacting with it, knowing what it is. That's going to be the best thing. And like all those ways you said are great. And, even heck, maybe even now, like something like Zoom or these calls or all these remote tools we have now, maybe, that can make things even a little quicker. It's like now you don't have to fly or go somewhere. Maybe, scheduling just becomes a little easier because now I can just plop down in my living room and say, okay, cool, let's hear this now. And, let me try to convey that real quick with maybe 15 minutes of your time. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think this time I want to talk real quick, because you mentioned before, like, the different elements of it. Like in general, the different elements, this is a visual medium for the most part. I mean, there are some kind of audio like on the games, but whatever the game is, it's probably a good idea to try to recreate that. Help that experience. Talking about it's all you have, that's all you can do. But because also we're talking to an indie audience, right? So you have these indie teams. So indie team can be a person. It can be, 50 people, and we can be bigger than that for some. But we're talking probably, even if you listen to this, it's like 1 to, several tens of people, maybe, So the limit, like everybody's not a great, trailer maker. Everybody's not a great, they can write the things or, do an awesome technical demo or do whatever it is. Cause you might just be a game designer with an idea and you really want to pull this off. And that's what we talked about before when we've talked all these things about that idea, that unfair advantage, meaning like, that's like sort of like a, Silicon Valley kind of term, was like when you're pitching a company, what's our unfair advantage? Why is our, site better than other people? And the way I like to think about it, it's not just unfair advantage. Like it's really just what's your unique approach to this? Like, what are you good at? What is your team good at? Like you could have a team that, like, we have a really great concept artist, right? That's what you're saying. Like, we might not be able to make a video, but we can put together a cool slideshow of all these really awesome concept artists. Or I'm really good at like writing a little cool story, or writing some music for this thing. Like you have to be really resourceful, because also you have to be kind of wary as an indie team of spending, because you could spend $1 million and get all this stuff made for you. Right. But that would defeat the purpose of you trying to get money. You just have to make your game.
Just spend it all.
Yeah. So you're trying to, this is a resource management game. That's what life is, but that's what making an indie game is. That's why there's a billion indie game simulator, right? Because that's what it is. You have some limited amount of resources. So it's like really just lean into your strengths, and like if that's how you do. And that's what you see that with a lot of Kickstarters. That's what you notice, because you can tell what a team is good at. Like, oh, this team has a demo. Sometimes you see they're fully done games, but sometimes they're the smartest ones. And I think the ones that do the best, and this might not work for every team, are the ones that have a good artist already in place, because they've done all the elements. They've done all these things. You're like, oh, this is really, because honestly, like I said, it's a visual medium, and having that stuff set up from the beginning, like, we all have programmer backgrounds. Like, so, we can make the most awesome like network optimization thing that's like, this is genius. And you could just tell they're like, cool, that's fine.
Right. You don't
like
think
there's lots of nobody that doesn't translate at all. It could be like, you don't understand, this is like $1 billion game idea underneath. They're like, where are the pictures? Like, I want to see the picture. So
this is cubes. I don't understand.
Yeah. So I would say like lean into the things that are cost, effective for you, and not try to match everybody else's pitch, because everybody's pitch is different. And that unfair advantage is your unique authenticity, to bring it back to the idea. That's what it becomes. It's using your authenticity as a advantage,
Right. I agree. 100% agree. And I think that's a good point as well, as just like a lot of the people that you're talking to in these pitches and in these rooms may not have a game develop, maybe not even have a game developer background. They like some people, sometimes you talk to people who are maybe like an associate and kind of like are here to like suss out whether your game is worth it. And they may play a lot of games, but may not be a developer. So like understanding that it might be, a more visual kind of conversation. But then you may have conversations with a technical director or someone who's been, in DevOps or been a studio director for multiple years. And they do want to know, like, how does your backend work? How's your networking stack? What are you using for the game engine? They may have those same kind of questions, and will your game scale? How are you planning to make it scale? What does live ops like? Like we talked to the other day to a live ops, someone who's been in live ops for most of their career, and that was their question during our pitch. Is like, hey, have you planned for your live ops, and what does that look like? So those conversations, again, that goes back to our audience topic, is just, you kind of really need to cater your pitch each time to whoever you're talking to, because to really capitalize on their kind of expertise and maybe what they will give them confidence that you have the skills to succeed, et cetera.
So cool. Bean, a question for you. In those meetings, when you're doing the pitch, like, we're talking about the different segments where, some make, really be interested in the gameplay or the art or the atmosphere or something like that. And then you have things like, what are your live op plans? What are your future maybe monetization plans? Is that, is that usually all in the same pitch? From what you've encountered, or is it sometimes is that like a layered thing where it's like, okay, we just kind of sold them on the idea. Right. Now they're like in with the idea. Then they say, okay, we'll go a little further with you. Now what do you look like? What do you need for infrastructure? And then how much is that going to cost and stuff like, so are there layers to that, I'm assuming?
Yeah, great question. And more often than not, there is a layered thing. But what I've seen is, the first time you're sitting down with them, you already have your deck. You probably maybe even set them a deck ahead of time and they've reviewed it cursively. So you're going through this deck with them and say, okay, here's the game, here's our gameplay, here's our game design, and here's what we need. And when I say what we need is like, hey, here's the money figure that we're looking for when I'm talking to like investors. And then depending on who's on that call, that in that initial call, it could be the TD, it could be, someone who has a very high level technical skill. And then they might ask that question that's about like architecture or networking stack, or cloud computing, et cetera stuff. So that's when you need to know. I think goes back to like the practice part and having confidence in what you're delivering. Is you need to have all these questions kind of pre-answered. And I think that's a really, to Andrew's point, a really good thing about the practice part is the more you practice and see, or sitting in front of different VCs and different people who are going to receive your pitch, the more questions you're going to get from people, and that will more refine your pitch essentially, because they're going to ask questions about tech. And you're like, oh, we never thought about putting our architectural design in our deck. So you kind of make a note of that, and then you solve that problem. We haven't really looked into the competitor analysis in as much depth as we're getting questions about. So you go in, you take a couple of weeks, and you really define your competitor analysis piece to your deck. And so that's one thing that we've kind of done is we've actually created multiple decks. That it's crazy. I think we almost iterate on our deck almost every few weeks, because the conversations that we have kind of redefine and refine our pitch. And I think the further along you get in your process, the better likelihood you're, of course, well, this kind of makes sense. This is kind of obvious.
Right. Well, not necessarily. No.
Because it just gives you it gives you the chance to really refine your pitch. And by getting those questions and reacting to them, don't forget to take notes in every conversation that you have. Listen to what the, whoever you're pitching to is saying. Every question, every comment, has weight to it. They've been doing pitches and listening to pitches for a good portion of their day or their week or their month. So they have a lot of questions, and kind of there's content in everything they say. So make sure you take note of it and then react to it.
I want to add to that, because I just thought of something. This is related to what I just did, which is you guys know this. I like to think out loud. That's what I do on the show whenever we're talking. I'm like, oh yeah, that makes me. But also, this is how I approach those conversations too. Because you can treat them like, I know you still get nervous about those pitches and treat them like there's some kind of test when they want to ask you these questions. You're like, I need to know all the answers, but you're not going to. I mean, you just can't prepare every single possibility, and they might ask you stuff. What I'd say, this is part of that, practicing, making that muscle, articulating yourself and just talking about yourself better, is that you always want to make sure you're kind of, shown in a good light, and you're not, representing your company or your brand and all that stuff really well. But don't be afraid to be transparent about, if they said hey, have you thought about doing this? You go, actually, honestly, we haven't thought about that. But don't just say, because if you get into this is a test, you're answering questions, you could get no, I'm sorry, I did. No, just go. If you were talking to a colleague, they'd ask you that, and you're like, well, no, we haven't thought about that. But you can go, well, the reason we haven't, because we've been trying to actually focus on this, this, and this, and that. Right. And then that actually, two things might happen. One, you might get great ideas from them, because they're like, well, I've had experience doing, distributing to this market and this, whatever it is. They might actually give you some valuable information, whether they accept your pitch or not. That feedback is really great. So make sure you're not just BSing them. Make sure you're telling them the truth about, the difficulties or some parts where you're not sure of, especially even in this environment, it's going to come after this, our show today. That's a great place to learn and get a lot of feedback on that. So don't BS too much. Part of marketing is, you're showing your best foot. I get that. But also, the second benefit of doing that, being transparent and sort of thinking out loud in that moment, is that a lot of times that's what they're looking for. They're looking for how you actually go through a problem and how you work it out, and that you're honest about it. You know what? That might impress them more than any of this pre-canned stuff you're going to actually do. You need to do it, but they might be really looking to see how you think through problems and how you're going to work, because this is going to be a partnership, whether in money or effort. And it needs to, a lot of people would rather know that that person is coming from a solid, footing, and they can really, because any creative project, we all know this, everybody's made games. It's just a cascade of decisions that you didn't know the day before. Right. There's no answer. You're just like, I don't know. So really, I mean, if they were smart people that, pitchies that you're pitching to, that's what they'd be always looking for, is like, how are you working through things you don't know about yet? How are you planning for that? How are you accommodating? And how are you, the thought process that goes into that?
Right. And you mentioned, you kind of said they're kind of looking to you and see how you operate as a person. I think that's something that we haven't really underscored just yet, is that we did it in authenticity, but really underscore the fact that they want to, like, people who are listening to, they want to understand who you are and your capability. It's not always about just your product or your project or your game. Your gameplay could be amazing, but if they don't have confidence in you as a leader or as an engineer or as a tech artist or as an artist, that's going to shy them away more so than an amazing game, because there's a lot that, the kind of the foundation of the game is the people that are working on it. You hear that across any company town halls, like, oh, you guys are the reason that we're doing well. And that's the truth. It's like the people and the individuals and individual contributors are what make the product. So making sure you surround yourself with great people. If that person is just you, then be great. But yeah, just it is about the individual and the collective studio.
It's totally true. I mean, I didn't understand that before I really got into being a professional developer on this side of it. Because before, when you haven't done anything and you're just like, I got all these great ideas, but you realize, like, a team that can pull off something really well and collaborate is like almost 95% of it. Right. Like, they could have a really mundane idea and make something really solid and engaging. Whereas I've seen great ideas. I mean, this is not anybody like we know or something, but I've seen great ideas get squandered. We've all seen it. We've all seen from big companies. You're like, what a great game idea. Right. And it's not, I'm not blaming, like, there's a lot of variables and we all know that. So we're always on the side of developers. So we're always, but you've seen great ideas that you get pitched at E3 and the other places get squandered. So yeah, you're right. I mean, to me, it's like almost 80-90% the team more than even some of that basic idea. So definitely that's what to keep in mind. That's what you're selling, because they're also, like we said before, they're giving you something too. This is a partnership. It's not just,
And when I told you, oh, go ahead, Ryan.
I was going to say, we, speaking of it being a partnership, we really haven't gone into like sort of that, there's another end of this, that you're also interviewing the people you're pitching to see, because it's a two-way street, right? You definitely need something from them, but you're also providing something as well. And to know that they can actually, provide for your needs as well is something you need to be on the lookout for. How are they, what's their personality like? If you do say, like the instance earlier, you don't know the answer to a question, but you're act like a genuine person, say, hey, we don't know right now, we can look into that and get back to you about it, or maybe do you have some advice? If they come off as sort of flippant or rude, or well, you should have had that ready, and it's like, well, yeah, you're right, I should have, but now you start to get this maybe feeling that, are these people going to be like this down the road? Is it, or, if they actually do jump on board with this, or are we just going to be under their thumb for things? So I don't know. I mean, have you ever encountered or any feelings from that doing pitches before, where you're like, sort of, talking to the person and you're like, this might go well, but I don't even know if we want to do this.
Right. No, yeah, we definitely have more than once, actually. I think you want, whoever you're in a partnership with, partnership is such a key word, is you want there to be mutual respect, whether that's in what you do or in the vision and the product that you have. So if they don't respect or care about your product, or not excited about it, don't want to help, like, oh, we know someone, we worked with a studio the other day or the other year that's doing that did a similar game and had similar problems. Maybe we can, connect the two of you. Like having those kind of interactions where, they're willing to boost you up and help you to really succeed for the whole, for the collective. That kind of attitude is what really draws you into different, partnerships and investors and whoever you're talking to, is that mutual respect and admiration. Go ahead.
And that mutual respect too, I'll just even to caveat the other thing that I just said, like, that mutual respect. So they're showing you their respect right through that, and that's what you don't need. Yeah, you're looking for people you want to be partners with, but you're also showing them how much you respect this, what's going to happen by the preparation. Because even like what I just said is like that stuff is if you get into emergency, that doesn't replace the the 90% of work you need to actually do to prepare, and that stuff informs the next pitch if you didn't know. So that doesn't mean we like you wing it, or you come in there and if you have all your stuff together and the most you can, that's how you show respect. And that's how, because that's what they want to see too. They want to see that you can explain yourself about unknown bits, but they also want to know that you go, oh, they have their stuff together. They thought about this as much as they can. This is what they had,
Yeah,
so.
to also add on to that, what a good like person that you're pitching to, whether that's investor or whatever, or studio or publisher, a good one will say, you may not have this answer. And as long as you're not completely going there blind, they're going to be like, okay, well, let's reschedule. Let's come back and circle back to some of those things so we can talk about it further. If they're interested in, like the base level things, sure, you may not have anything like specific numbers on one or two things, comments that they made, but they probably will most likely circle back and say, hey, let's schedule 2 months out and circle back and talk about things.
And that's a good situation, but you can't always control them.
You can't.
That's like we're wishing for or something,
That's fair, but that's like every situation.
Right.
There's like you can't control any. You may something catastrophic could go wrong, like maybe say your servers don't start up during a playtest, which happened to me one time. There's like some things you can't. You're like,
that stuff always happens.
Like sweating bullets, man.
Yeah, and it happens, and it's like, okay, well, if it's not meant to be, it's not meant to be. If they're interested, and we can go from there. But
third-party services always like to shut down right in the middle of pitches. Like, and he's like, what is this plugin?
Exactly. Cool. I forgot what I was going to say.
Oh my God, I didn't mean to derail. Sorry.
I literally have no idea. But what were we talking about prior to that?
Hitching.
Oh, yes, about not knowing things. But what I was going to say is,
like another thing to say is. Yeah, I'm just making it worse. I'm sorry.
Exactly.
Let him get to it.
Serious before I forget it again. But another thing that they might do, which is very helpful, is like just recommend, hey, if you don't have answers to say, we ask you a slew of questions about marketing or what you're going to do in live ops, or maybe how your architecture is, they might say, okay, well, it sounds like you don't have that expertise on your team. Maybe go out and look for that expertise. Maybe find an advisor who maybe has been a technical director and has released a couple of games and knows that avenue of game development that you don't quite know. So they really want to like try to really bolster your team. I feel like a good investor, someone that's going to be on your side for the long term, because games don't get out in a week. It's going to be a long-term endeavor. So that kind of partnership needs to be mutually beneficial for the long term. So they will suggest things like, hey, find an advisor. Go ahead.
Right. And that also kind of we're going to keep cycling back to everything. It cycles back to that choosing your audience, right? Like who the audience is, like, because that actually, and what the goal and the actual point of the pitch is. And that can gauge sometimes how well that's judged, like if you went into like, you're pitching to a group of like game developers at an indie meetup about working on a game, it's easy to go, I don't know a lot of these details, but I know this, and that. If you're going in to ask for $1 million from someone like some VC, you know what I mean? Like that is a thing, because especially in the game industry, that could be money they're just throwing down the toilet. Right. Like that, because this isn't, in all business, it's risky. But again, let's go back to our thing. Like this is art and commerce. Part of this is art. Like if it doesn't perform as some sort of, it doesn't capture the marketplace and engage it in some sort of way, they can just totally bomb and go away. And they've just wasted that money. It can be very volatile, So some of that, it's like, come correct. It's like if you're asking for money at a certain level, how would you go and ask somebody for money? Like, how much would you pay? Because that just ties in what the point of the audience of that is.
Like you're just saying, like understanding the gravity of like what you're asking for, and
and that probably even ties into some of the things you were talking about, Ryan, about like what parts of the you're talking about your multiple decks. If you have multiple decks of different people, but it's like, oh, if I'm asking for money, then I actually need to know how I'm going to spend that money, what the milestones, and how we're actually going to use it. Because sometimes people say that, but scoping out a team, then money and stuff, that's like a whole another skill set to get into and really understanding how that's going to work, because these things they're not being jerks too. They're giving you money to do this. So it's like they need to know milestones on them being like mean. It's them knowing, understanding how that's happening, what's happening, if they can help. I mean, really, if you're even in a healthy relationship with that, it's like,
Yeah,
can we help you guys? You need more
you're in
support.
bed together now, so yeah, it's
Right.
it's a mutual thing. So
Right.
yeah, like you said, they need to know, hey, you're having trouble with something, you're burning money over here. Let's try to figure that out because it's their money too. It's their time
Right.
too. It's an investment, So having those open lines of communication and making sure everybody's on the same page with those type of resources, money or time or whatever it may be, that's a very important thing to keep up with, or else, like you said, it just goes right down the toilet before you know it. So
I think we all get traumatized early in school, and sometimes I'll speak for myself. Like, it's like you feel like these things are assignments and homework. And it's like, no, this is nobody's trying to give you a hard time. This is all part of a partnership. You know what I mean? This isn't some kind of just some latent problem with authority. You need to actually, there are your partners, and that we keep saying that, and that's something you got to keep reminding yourself, because they wouldn't be talking to you if they're not. You're focused on what you need from them, but they need you to actually interact with the world of the game development market. Like, they don't have developers, they want developers. That's the best thing to think about, because again, you're going into this as like how you would find a programmer to work with or an artist to work with. I mean, This is a little more formal, and a lot of times you don't know them, and these are businesses, and it can be different depending on the context, but it really is something you need to feel like a colleague of these people. I don't care how much money they have.
And I think the best kind of equivalent, and something that we've already said, is like, it is like a job interview. And I think that same level of mutual respect should be apparent and should be consistent in all of the interviews that you may go on from now until you retire. It's like, they understand your worth, and you understand their worth. And this, just having that mutual understanding is key. One thing that you touched on earlier that I kind of want to go back to, still watching the time, we have 8 minutes left, FYI, is that part of like, whether you're at a conference, not a conference, or like a meetup, and you're pitching to someone else, and you just like, if you're talking about money, you need to have your shit together. But I think, even if you're talking to someone at like a meetup, having your stuff together is really important too, because I think there's so many connections that I've made within my own studio that have come from having our stuff together, like having a process and pipeline, having our CI set up, having like even like simple things as like a company email and like VPN servers, and just things that when people join your team, they're like, it sounds like I could see where this is going, or I have confidence in this team platform. So when you have the more process and more pipelines and just confidence that you can instill with, and whoever you're talking to is going to lead you in the right direction and really set you up for success. Because then, if you didn't have that, great artist or concept artist or someone who could work on a trailer, if you do a pitch like that to someone in a meetup, and you're like, okay, well, I have this great idea. Here's all the process. Here's, I have all my stuff together. Here's where you could fit in. They're like, okay, well, I see value in that. I can see like I want to, because everyone that's working on an indie game are investing as well. Whether they're giving you money, they're also could be giving you your time and their talent. So everyone's an investor when it comes to indie developments.
Yeah, and it kind of, I like that idea, because also if you're thinking about using an individual, let's even just go to the tiniest version of this. Like your game, your indie project has lots of people, but it started as one or a couple of people. Like if you had an idea, it kind of goes into what's your specialty, excuse me, and that needs to actually inform your pitch, right? Like if you're a programmer, then you've thought about, you need to like the way to show that the people, when it's still just on paper. We're talking about if it's just on paper, right? You haven't made anything yet. Or maybe but you can show like, oh, I've already made this, I've already thought about how I'm going to do this fight system that's going to work this, and this. So you're talking to the programmers, oh, that makes sense. But even that translates talking to people that are artists, like, oh, that sounds cool. Where in an artist, that's like, well, I've already figured out all the sort of flags for these different, countries in the game, and all these other, whatever, these different races. We're going to have all these different types of, all these, whatever it is, you've gone through it. And also with the designer is the big point, because a lot of people, game designer, it's like, it's not just coming up with, this is a cool idea for a game, right? Like game designer, you have to figure out, okay, next, what are all the systems? How will they work together? What's the currency? What's the economy? Whatever, whatever applies to that. What's the combat system? What happens in this, that? Showing that you've gone to that level and really thought through the idea, like thinking through, or whether it's through technically, artistically, design wise, that shows potential investors, potential collaborators. That's your potential and that's the stuff that pays off. And as much as you can, again, we've talked about that's a process, and you learn more and more and add the knowledge to that thinking through. But just an initial level of, because everybody's heard that game ideas. We're talking about, even at these conferences, we're like, yeah, I got this game idea, it'd be great. We also usually hear game ideas from people that aren't, and that's what you see on YouTube comments and things like, why don't they just do this and that? And you're like, well, hold on. Anybody as a developer goes, let's think about that. Let's walk through that. If I did that, then this would have the case. We have to move that whole system. They're not thinking it through because they're not professionals. That's the part about being a professional as opposed to being an amateur. And you, as any of this stuff, I don't care if you made, this might be a great point as we're wrapping up. This comes from Stephen Pressfield's an author that I really like. He has a book called The War of Art, but he talks about this all the time about you're a professional. Like, you need to act like a professional. Like, you might not have made or sold a game yet, but for this to be successful and to get other people involved, you're not an amateur anymore. You need to think of yourself as a game developer, whatever your discipline is, and go into that and prepare just like it'd be for a job, just like it'd be for these things, and think through the process. It's not a casual, I came up with a game idea. It's like, I've sat down and filled this notebook about how I could actually make this work. And that's the stuff that's going to pay off. Whoever the context is, like you said, if you have those materials ready, you don't know if at the next meetup you're going to pick up an artist or somebody that wants to spend money, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Show somebody else your investment before you start asking for theirs. It's
like, I like that line.
It's like, here's how much I've invested.
Quote of the day.
I'm serious. Do you want to be serious? Because
Yeah, I think you'll see that in investor talks as well, is they want to know what you've put in, whether that's the time amount that you put in, but generally, they're like, oh, well, how is this have been the capital all self-driven right now? That answer is probably like, yes. And so they do ask that questions like, hey, how are you investing in this game? And sometimes if you're asking for a lot of seed money, they're like, okay, well, show me that you're also inspired by your game by showing me how much you're willing to put in as well, or maybe gather friends and family or coworkers to actually pull together some sum of money to show that they're interested as well. So
sell some NFTs. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, do what you gotta do. Well, let me know. That is terrible. Anyway, the last thing I want to touch on, we have a couple more minutes left, is a great point that you brought up offline, Andrew, is just like to that point about partnership. And you want to find investors who know the domain that you did. You kind of equated it to the Shark Tank kind of example.
All right. Yeah.
I think that's one important. Did you want to speak to that, or do you want me to just wrap it up real quick?
Well, you can explain. I mean, you both know what it is. Really, basically it's just getting people that are more appropriate, because also if you're lucky enough to get to, now I'm talking, not letting you talk. If you get to that,
so you could do it, but I'll take it.
No, I'm just like,
I'll tell you it all.
Yeah. This is a great taste for the show, by the way. Yeah. Like if you Andrew takes over. Like if you're fortunate enough to get to the point of making money, or people are like have multiple investors, this is sort of like a great problem to have. That's why it's at the end here. But if you get to the point where there's multiple people that want to be involved, it's not just money. It's like, hey, they have 4 different programmers, and I'm making a fighting game. This guy's made a fighting game. It gets into that. But with money, it's hard to think about because you don't know how people can help you. But I just thought about the Shark Tank example because people on the show are like, well, I want to sell something, but this person actually sells products better than this person who invests in real estate. Like, You have to get smart about who this ties into everything, ties in just collaborators, who your collaborators are in this project, and where they can amplify that unique unfair advantage we talked about. Where can they help the most, when you bring them on?
And I think that's definitely research that everyone should do who's on this call, who's listening, who's considering pitching, is do research on whoever your investor or publisher that you're going to talk to, because there are investors that focus solely on games. And then within that niche, there's investors that are solely on freemium or, premium games or free to play games. So knowing who you're pitching to and finding that perfect audience for your type of game, or maybe even just mobile games or PC games or console games. Yeah, exactly. So there's kind of a niche market for indie or game investors. So make sure you do that research. It's very, very, very important. And I think
it'd be like going into a job of a developer and not ever playing their games. You're like, I don't know, I haven't touched y'all's games before. It's like, what?
What does the A button do? I don't know.
Right. Yeah. That's actually a good tip. Is just do your research on the investor for sure.
Right.
Before you even talk to them. Cool. I'm going to end it right there. I think we did a solid job of sticking to time. I was going to throw Alex
weird.
under the bus for his last time, but anyway. But anyway, so yeah, if you want to catch us, you could catch us on Facebook or go to our website at thedebuglog.com or go to facebook.com, of course, and then search for the Debug Lounge. We have a fun little get together there that you can kind of join. You can catch me on Twitter or Instagram at Obeans. It's O with an H, Beans with a Z.
You can catch me on Twitter too. When I post, it's at Andrew_Curry. That's CURRIE.
You can hear the deafening silence on Twitter from me at RE Kilgore, KILLGORE.
Perfect.
You,
Sweet.
everyone.
Back to you, Ben.
Thanks, guys. I like how well that was rehearsed there at the end. I can tell you've done this a few times. It goes around the table.
100 episodes in, man.
It's great. So yeah, I mean, hopefully people found this useful today. I know we had a few different comments there in the chat, some questions that I think you actually ended up answering as you went, which is awesome. But thank you so much for joining today. And a perfect segue into our next section, which is the IGDA pitch panel. I mean, I think what you guys just talked about, a lot of people are already hopping over there. We'll put the link up in just a second. Was there any last words of wisdom or anything you wanted to shout out or talk about? We have a few minutes before we need to sign over to that.
Don't be scared.
Yeah.
that's
Don't be scared and keep at it. I mean, I've heard that from
Right.
the other participants or panelists here is like, just keep at it. Don't, it can be discouraging over time. Hearing no so many times can definitely wear on you, but, just keep at it because everyone knows something you can learn. Like we said here, you'll find your gaps. Maybe the first time you do it, it doesn't go well, but you'll know where those gaps are now and can fill them. And that's for pitches or even just like, writing your first game and like learning programming or something like that. Keep at it.
Right. And also that ties in what Obinna said earlier about keeping notes. It's like, don't treat it like a failure if you pitch it and they didn't like it, or they give you, don't be like, I suck, I'm a failure, I shouldn't be doing this, everybody hates me. Like, go, you know what? Actually, that was a great point about that game. I actually should go in there and rework that. And actually, hold on, that gave me some other idea. Just don't take it personally. That's one of the biggest things I see with people in this. This is, you're supposed to get better at this. This is all supposed to get better over time. All these skills involved, everything involved skin. This isn't something you're born with. So don't take it personally, learn from it.
I really like that idea of taking notes. And I've seen a lot of like students I used to teach, and they would do that and then actually flip that, and not just like I'm taking notes so I can learn for myself, but actually being able to show in like the form of a blog or a video content or whatever. Like, hey, I'm actually making progress. This is what I started off with in year one. Now I'm a year in or however far in, and this is what I'm doing now. I think if realistically, if you look back on a year or more than that of work and you think, oh, this is garbage, why was I doing this? This is awful. Like, that's normal, right?
No, that's great. That's the goal.
You should see that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So if you're not seeing that, that's more concerning. So yeah, I think that's a reoccurring theme of you're probably going to hear no a few times. You're probably going to fail drastically a few times, but you got to keep going and eventually, keep slugging it and hopefully you get there.
Yep.
Well, Ben, you took my word of wisdom, so thank you. I'm just kidding. Cool.
All right. Well, I guess we'll let you guys sign off here, and we'll continue over on the IGDA Discord. Thank you once again for joining in that. That was an awesome podcast.
Yep. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for having us. Yeah, that's